Good evening. I'm Elaine Geller, co-chair of this year's Lois Zaas Advocacy Memorial Lecture. On behalf of the National Council of Jewish Women Cleveland, welcome to this, our 17th annual program, The Changing Faces of Anti-Semitism. And thanks for sticking with us as we work through those technical issues last week. We do appreciate your flexibility and your understanding during these times, and are grateful to have you here with us tonight for this very important conversation with Deborah Lipstadt and James Pash on anti-Semitism, which is at near historical levels in the United States. We hope you leave today with a greater understanding of how anti-Semitism is manifesting today on both the left and the right side of the aisle, and with a direction on how to respond to these incidents. We are extremely grateful to the Zaas family for enabling us to convene lectures like this one and to help raise awareness on critical social issues in memory of their beloved wife and mother, Lois Zaas. You'll see some photos of Lois through the years up on the screen. Lois was the ultimate embodiment of the values on which NCJW stands. Based on her personal values of respect and honor for every human life, Lois, of blessed memory, sought to create a world in which every person could live the most productive life possible. Her legacy and leadership inspire NCJW to continue to work toward the world she envisioned. I know that members of the Zaas family are with us tonight. To them, on behalf of all of us, thank you. Before moving to the main part of our program, I'd like to introduce you to Dana Trout and Laura Coons, our co-vice presidents of Advocacy, who will present the annual Advocacy and Action Award to two members who consistently personify advocacy in action.
Thank you, Elaine. We couldn't be more thrilled to present this year's Advocacy in Action Award to two amazing advocates. Linda Schlein and Stephanie Caranta are NCJW Cleveland board members and are the co-chairs of our Reproductive Rights and Health Committee, which works on issues focusing on women's health, ranging from abortion rights to infant and maternal mortality. They've also been instrumental in spearheading a pending bill in the Ohio legislature focusing on pregnancy discrimination. This bill, which was sponsored by Senator Nikki Antonio and Representative Terrence Upchurch, ensures that employers in the state of Ohio provide reasonable accommodations for women who need them during their pregnancy. As you may be aware, reproductive rights advocacy is a real challenge here in Ohio. As former chairs of the committee ourselves, we know firsthand how difficult it is to advocate for reproductive health rights and justice. In pursuit of women's health, Linda and Stephanie have worked tirelessly with a multitude of community partners, including A Better Balance, the Women's Public Policy Network, the Freedom of Choice Ohio Coalition, Preterm, and many of our state legislators.
Throughout these past years, Stephanie and Linda have remained resilient, resourceful, and creative, finding new ways to advocate and educate on women's health issues. Linda, who has co-chaired the committee for 3 years, has brought new members and new perspective to the work, thanks in part to her vast networks. In addition to her work at NCJW, Linda sits on many social justice committees at Fairmount Temple and volunteers at In Motion and the League of Women Voters Shaker Heights. Stephanie, with her background as a corporate lawyer, has made our entire committee better advocates in the 2 years she has co-chaired the committee. She is able to navigate the minutia of creating legislation and explain messaging and language to the committee in clear and easy to understand ways. Her legal acumen has made us valuable partners to legislators working on women's rights. It has been our joy to watch these two passionate women grow into amazing leaders. They truly exemplify the Advocacy in Action Award because they work tirelessly inside of NCJW Cleveland and in partnership to ensure women's reproductive health is a priority in Ohio. Congratulations, Stephanie and Linda. We are so proud to work with you.
Thank you so much for this award. Linda is amazing to work with. She is driven, dedicated, and has high expectations of everyone she works with. I'm incredibly lucky to be working with her. And I continue to be amazed by the hard work and dedication of Dana and Laura as the VPs of Advocacy, and Susan and Aaron as the state policy reps, and of course our amazing staff. The list of strong women at NCJW is a mile long, and that is the strength of our organization. And we're going to need that strength to fight the battles to come. The fight for women's rights, especially reproductive rights in Ohio, is only going to be more difficult. But NCJW is just the organization to take on that fight, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this amazing honor. Working with Stephanie on reproductive rights and health to improve the lives of women and children has been so rewarding. So once I met Stephanie, I realized that we had a connection. Her children had been in my daughter Lori's class at Mercer. Her family participates in my daughter Stacy's Shabbaton program at the Temple Tifereth Israel, and she had also worked with my son-in-law Jeremy at Jones Day. This was going to be a wonderful partnership. We're both committed and work so well together with guidance from Laura and Dana. So when I got the information about receiving the award, I sent the information to a few friends and family members. My dear friend Laura Rubin remembered Lois Zaas and decided to look her up in the Jewish News archives. Lois was mentioned at least 200 times. 36 years ago, in 1984, Lois gave my dad, Ruby Wolf, the Leonard Cronenberg Membership Award at the JCC annual meeting. Earlier, my dad had founded the JRC so that Jewish men could participate in sports. In his later years, he was a true advocate for the JCC, so I guess I inherited his advocacy genes. My dad passed away several years ago, and this connection is truly a blessed memory. Thank you so much for this honor.
Thank you, Linda and Stephanie, and our congratulations. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our impressive speakers. I am Leslie Resnick, co-chair of this evening's event. Dr. Deborah E. Lipstadt is known worldwide as an expert in anti-Semitism. She is the Dorick Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies at Emory University and has published and taught the Holocaust and anti-Semitism for close to 40 years. She is most widely known for the libel lawsuit brought against her in 1996 by David Irving for calling him a Holocaust denier. The judge did find in favor of Dr. Lipstadt, declaring Irving to be a neo-Nazi polemicist and perverter of history. The movie Denial, starring Rachel Weisz, is based on Dr. Lipstadt's book about the trial. Dr. Lipstadt is the author of numerous books, including The Eichmann Trial and most recently, Anti-Semitism Here and Now. She was an historical consultant to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and has addressed Congress. She is frequently quoted in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Forward, and Tablet. Dr. Lipstadt regularly appears on BBC, CNN, NPR, and PBS. She received her BA from City College in New York and her master's and PhD from Brandeis University. She is currently researching yet another book. Our moderator, who will dialogue with Dr. Lipstadt following her presentation, is a man well known in the local, regional, and national community. James Pash is the Cleveland Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League, serving Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Western Pennsylvania. In addition, as we all know, he's president of Beechwood City Council. Mr. Pash graduated from the University of Vermont and Case Western Reserve University School of Law. He worked on Capitol Hill for both Frank Lautenberg and Senator Patrick Leahy prior to building his thriving small firm litigation practice in Cleveland. He served as Case Western Reserve Law School's Assistant Dean of Development and Alumni Affairs during the law school's Capitol campaign. Deborah, it is my pleasure to turn our event over to you.
Good evening. It's a pleasure being with you. I'm sorry for the glitch of last time, but it's nice to be here now. Though the topic of which I come to speak is not a pleasant one, it's certainly something that's been on the mind of every thinking Jew for the past couple of years. And one of the things I'm often asked is, how do we define anti-Semitism? How do we know somebody can be obnoxious, but how do we know when they're being anti-Semitic? And sometimes I rely on, for many of us, we don't know exactly how to define it, but we rely on probably one of the most famous lines to ever come out of the Supreme Court by Justice Potter Stewart in the early 60s, I believe it was. It was a Louis Malle film about pornography. And he said famously, and I'm sure many of you are reciting it with me now, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Many of us, we can't precisely define it, but we know it when we see it. There's a famous professor who was, I don't know if he was the one who originated this, but who used to say anti-Semitism, an anti-Semite is someone who hates Jews more than is absolutely necessary. Now, when I say that to my class, they sort of look at me somewhat skeptically when we can meet in person or even over Zoom, because they're not sure whether to laugh or not. And I assure them they can laugh. It is a joke. But then I also add the fact that it's true. I can hate you for good reasons or bad. But if I hate you one iota more because you are a Jew, then that's anti-Semitism. Just like if the person were gay and I hated them one iota more, or that would be homophobia. If a person of color, would be racism, etc. But actually, we can do better than that. I think the important thing is to understand is that anti-Semitism is a form of prejudice. And as is the case with all prejudices, it's irrational. Think about the word prejudice. Think about the etymology of the word prejudice. Prejudge. Don't confuse me with the facts. I've made up my mind. So when I see you, if I see, you're a person of color, if I know you're a Jew, I see something on you that indicates you're a Jew, I know what you're going to be like, which of course is ridiculous because you can be any one of a number of things. It's prejudice is also not about what a person does, but who a person is. That's how Jews are. That's how Blacks are. That's how gay people are. Now, prejudice can sometimes come across as positive. You might hear someone say, well, he's not like the rest of them. Or some of my best friends are. When I first heard that, I thought it was a compliment till my father said to me, I was too young to understand it, but now I understand it. Well, you'll never hear someone say some of my best friends are white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. In other words, if you're boasting about having these people as your friends, or you're saying, I'm so terrific, I have them as my friends, or I'm friends with the good ones, it's rooted in a hostile attitude. And of course, any prejudice relies on stereotypes. And each group in a prejudice, there's stereotypes associated with each group, and you can't mix them up because they don't make sense. So what are the stereotypes we know associated with anti-Semitism? I'm going to offer you 4. There may be others, but I think there are 4 that are central. 1, something to do with money, something to do with finances. 2, something to do with smarts, but as I like to say it, malicious smarts, conniving, crafty, clever. I don't know if it's hard C's or whatever. But in other words, smarts used for evil purposes. Something to do with power, with punching above your weight. A small group. That's the notion rooted, let's say, in one of the oldest or one of the, not oldest, but they're older, of course, but one of the best known anti-Semitic tracts, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is supposedly the minutes of a meeting of elders of Zion sitting, I believe, in Switzerland, planning how to get control of the whole world. A small group, but able to be powerful. When people talk about the Israel lobby, we bristle. Of course, there's a lobby, just like there's a lobby for the Irish lobby and I don't know, whatever, steel lobby, tobacco lobby, but we bristle because we know that often, not always, but often embedded in that is, oh, those Jews with their lobby. They're small, but they're powerful, well connected. And finally, the fourth element of the stereotype that I would add is the ability to do their work in disguise, or to send others, or to send members of their own group who do the work, and you don't realize that it's the Jews who are hoodwinking you. Um, that has its roots, by the way, in really the Jew as devil, which was part of Christian anti-Semitism, because the devil is someone who comes and does his work and then disappears, and you don't know you've been your life has been turned upside down, if not worse, by the devil until he's come and gone. Much of this I find, not all historians agree with me, but much of this I find has its roots in the New Testament and the depiction of the story of the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, thing to remember about the New Testament is the New Testament was a conversation amongst Jews. But once it gets, let's say, I don't know, 150 years after the death of Jesus, and into the hands of the Roman, it eventually becomes a track for demonizing Jews, differentiating Christians from Jews, and depicting Jews in a very negative way. But of course, it moves out of the Christian church. It's within the Christian church for many, many centuries, millennia, but it moves out and moves from the church to Karl Marx, who hated all religions, or to the science of eugenics, the pseudoscience on which Nazism based many of its ideas in the 19th century. That groups had different groups had different characteristics, and there were groups that were better and worse, etc. It moves, of course, to the Nazis. It moves all over the place. Today, we see it from the right and from the left. And I want to emphasize this point because often in the Jewish community, and not just in the Jewish community, but certainly within the Jewish community, those of us who are on the political left of center are very adept at seeing anti-Semitism on the right. And we're seeing it. It's there. We're seeing it quite accurately. And those who are right of center are very adept at seeing anti-Semitism on the left. And they're seeing the right thing. They're quite correct in what they're seeing. The problem is we often don't see anti-Semitism on the same side of the political spectrum where we reside. And those people who only see it on the other side, I often question their motives. I don't know if they hear me or I get a chance to question them to their face. Sometimes I do. That if they're only seeing it on the opposite side, then I have to say you're not really interested in anti-Semitism, but you're more interested in scoring political points. Now, where are some of the examples that we've seen it on the right? Well, we've seen it certainly the COVID lockdown. Many of the far right groups, whether it's QAnon or the Boogaloo Boys, rely on typical messages of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. We saw it graphically in Charlottesville 3 years ago. There's a civil case being brought against the organizers of it was called the Unite the Right rally. It was unprecedented, a rally to bring together all these far right-wing groups under one umbrella. And there's a civil suit being brought against the organizers on behalf of the family of Heather Heyer, the young woman who was killed, was murdered, and other people who were beaten up and hurt terribly. So I'm serving as an expert witness in that trial on the subject of anti-Semitism. So I got to pore over a binder, I don't know, this thick, if not thicker, of the documentation and the evidence relating to the organizers' anti-Semitism. And it is frightening. sending out emails. This was in the public record, so I can share these kind of things. Next stop, Charlottesville. Final stop, Auschwitz. And you heard those kind of things. They said those kind of things. They're on YouTube, etc. It was overt anti-Semitism. And I think it's very important to understand if we're talking about and this, many people saw it simply as, not simply, but as white supremacy, white nationalism, two terms that are different, but I'm going to talk about them as one tonight just for the sake of ease. And I think the thing to understand is that white supremacy and white nationalism is, of course, it's racist, but it has anti-Semitism at its base. And it displays itself or expresses itself in something called white genocide replacement theory or white genocide theory. It was evident at Charlottesville, but it's evident all over. We see it in Germany with the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, the far right group. We see it in many places on the far right. And what does it argue? It argues that there is a plan, there's a program to destroy Christian culture, to replace white Christian culture with Black people, with brown people, with people from Muslim countries, such as we saw with the influx of immigrants to Europe, such as we see with the influx of people of color from south of the border, etc. But says the white supremacist who's posing this theory, these people of color, remember I'm talking in their voice now, it's not me talking, I hope no one tunes in right at this moment, because they'll be confused, or they'll think I've lost my mind. It says the racist about these people, the people of color who've come to replace white and destroy white Christian culture. These people are not smart enough. These people are not talented enough. These people are not hardworking enough to do this on their own. There has to be someone behind them. There has to be someone manipulating them. They are the puppets. Who is the puppeteer? And they have an answer. They know exactly. The puppeteer, of course, is the Jew. So on the far right, whether it was the people at Charlottesville, whether it was the murderer at Pittsburgh, at the Poway San Diego synagogue, even the Walmarts in El Paso, who was out to kill the killer was out to kill Hispanic people, but in his writings and his comments, clearly the Jew was manipulator. Or the murderer in Halle, Germany, last Yom Kippur, who did not get into the synagogue, but for a reinforced door on the synagogue. But he did kill 2 people outside the synagogue. To them, Jews are not white. The murderer in Pittsburgh, what was he yelling as the SWAT team was bringing him down? You, the people I'm killing, will not destroy the white race. Or the people in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us. What do they mean? The Jews are behind this scheme to replace white Christian culture. We see the same thing in the QAnon, Boogaloo, all these far right groups. Now, how does it express itself on the left? It expresses itself differently on the left, using the same stereotypes of power, malicious, punching above their weight, but the perspective is different. On the left, the far left, their view of the world, maybe a bit extreme to say it that way, but certainly their view of prejudice, not of the world, but of prejudice, is refracted through a prism which has a number of facets. One facet is class, wealth. One facet is power and privilege. And they look upon Jews and they say Jews are rich, which of course we know is a vast generalization, taking us back to the stereotypes I gave you at the very beginning. Jews are powerful, Jewish lobby, punching above their weight. Jews have privilege. Ipso facto, they cannot be victims of prejudice because people who have wealth, power, privilege, it's structurally impossible for them to be victims of prejudice. Therefore, when a Jew cries anti-Semitism or says I'm a victim, um, they're not telling the truth. They're making it up. They're using it to get sympathy. They're using it to advance themselves. They're using it to hide the wrongs of Israel, whatever it might be. And there's another element on those on the left, and we see it quite clearly. I call it, as some of you may have heard me say this before, the Miss Piggy defense. Moi, me, me prejudice, me anti-Semite, that's impossible. I abhor every form of prejudice. I abhor every form of stereotyping. I am absolutely in my bones against all prejudice. Therefore, I could never be someone who dabbles in, is a perpetrator of prejudice. So if I can't be a perpetrator and you, the Jew, can't be a victim because you have class and privilege and power, then it's all made up. So for the person on the left, the Jew is the quintessential white person who can pass, even if they don't think of course, that ignores all the Jews of color in our midst. We don't know the number, but it is substantial. And on the right, we Jews are not whites, and we are the puppeteer controlling others. There is, of course, another source of anti-Semitism in recent years. It has its roots really both more in politics, but still can be dangerous. And that, of course, is from Islamist extremists. Not all Muslims, certainly not, but certainly Islamist extremists. Now, let me just move here now to types of anti Semites. The anti Semite can present in different ways. Certainly the extremist anti-Semite, the person at Charlottesville. We know those people, we recognize those people, the people in Pittsburgh, Poway, Halle, etc. On the left, who march in anti-Israel demonstration, Jews to the gas, as we saw in Berlin not so a couple of years ago. The extremists cause the most potential damage and violence, um, but they're also, but for the violence, which is a big but, um, they are in a way the least dangerous because we recognize them right off, and we can try to protect ourselves against them. But then you have what I call the dinner party or the salon anti-Semite. The person who says, "Oh, we hired a Jewish associate at our firm, but he's very honest," or "She's Jewish, but she's not so rich." That comment is, even though she's Jewish, she's not so rich. Even though he's Jewish, he's honest. It's rooted in an anti-Semitic view of the world, of these people. Now, there also could be what I call, those of you who know Yiddish, the kochlöffel, the cooking spoon, the person who stirs up the pot, who himself or herself may not be an anti Semite, but who emboldens the anti Semite, who makes them feel braver and more free to express their views, to express their anti Semitic views. We see this in the political realm very often. We've seen it in this country and other countries. People who themselves may not be anti Semites, I don't know what's in their heart, but I do know. And in fact, on some level, I don't care if the person personally is an anti Semite. I care what the impact of their words are. And we've seen that as well. And finally, the last type I want to touch on is what I call the clueless anti Semite. And in a way, even though the first group, the first category is the most dangerous, in a way, this is the most depressing. And it illustrates the very long and very hard struggle we have in fighting this. The person who engages in anti-Semitic stereotyping, anti-Semitic attitudes without even knowing they're engaging in anti-Semitism. Turning to the only Jew at a table when you're talking about a new store where you found bargains and say, "Oh, you're the one who's really going to be interested in this," and doing it without having any hostility or any anger or animosity towards the person. In other words, buying into the stereotypes as if they are just fact, buying into the stereotypes as if they are simply true. The last before I turn to some of the things we might do and then turn to James, I think of course I want to touch on Israel for just a moment. Of course, this whole talk in the time that we have could be just about Israel. I want to say quite explicitly that criticism of Israeli policies is not the equivalent of anti-Semitism. If you want to hear criticism of Israeli policies, go to the Knesset, and you will listen to the whoever's in the opposition criticizing policies, and you wouldn't say, "Oh, they're anti-Semitic." Just like people who criticize American policies, whatever they may be, and whoever they're supporting, it's not ipso facto anti-American. Criticism of policies is criticism, difference of opinion. That's what is characteristic of and distinguishes a democracy. But when you take a myopic view, a blinded view, and you see Israel as the only aggressor, as the sole human rights aggressor in the world, as you sometimes have seen at the Human Rights Council in at the UN, or when you look around the world and the only wrong you see is the wrongs done by Israel, which Israel does, like any country does, no different. Every country has done wrongs. But these are the only ones you see. I'm not saying that because every country does wrong, that makes it all right. I'm not saying that at all. But when you take this myopic view and you only see that, I've got to wonder what is motivating that sole kind of view. Um, I talked about right and left, and of course, one of the places we see anti-Semitism on the left is often on the college campus in guise of criticism of Israel, and again, not criticism of policies, but of the whole essence of Israel, of the existence of Israel, of the very idea of Israel. And if you're saying the Jews are the only people not uh, ineligible to have a country of their own, I have to ask again, why only them? Where is that coming from? What we can do, and James and I can talk more about this when we engage in conversation in just a moment, is of course, I think we have to become the unwelcome guests at the dinner party. Were we living in normal times? Well, I'd probably be in Cleveland with you, and we wouldn't be on Zoom. But were we living in normal times, and we'd all be up to our elbows in cooking turkeys and stuffings and pies and everything else, and getting ready to host or be a guest at a wonderful gathering. But I'm sure many of us, and God willing, will be able to do that by this time next year. But many of us have arrived at a Thanksgiving dinner or a Pesach Seder and been waylaid at the door by the host or the hostess who will say to us, listen, Uncle XYZ is here and he says racist things. Do me a favor, just let it pass. I want it to be a peaceful evening. Just ignore him or ignore her. Now, there was a time maybe we could do that, but I don't think we can do that anymore. And it's not because you're going to be able to change uncle or aunt XYZ's attitudes. They're probably rooted in their attitudes and they're not going to give them up. But it's to telegraph a message to the other people at the table, particularly, but not only the young people at the table, that we don't abide this kind of language. And if someone says something, words travel, words move. They don't stay still. And all these things begin with words. Um, we have to demand of the world that it recognize that anti-Semitism is part of the panoply of human rights abuses, and that they take it seriously, even though we as Jews, as I was saying earlier, may not present as our typical victims. And finally, the last point, and with this I'll close, to distinguish between vile comments and anti-Semitism. Every time someone says something that's negative that we might take the wrong way, whether it's in relation to Israel or anything else, um, be sure it's anti-Semitism before you cry anti-Semitism for two reasons. The accusation of anti-Semitism should be a terrible, terrible thing, not use something that we throw out mindlessly or easily or casually. And second of all, for strategic reasons. Um, when I call someone an anti-Semite, I want the world to hear. I want the world to listen. And I don't want the world to say, oh, Deborah, she's always someone she doesn't like, someone she disagrees with. She calls them an anti Semite. I think that would be a very dangerous thing. So, with that, I'm going to close. I'm sure there are questions. And James, I'm happy to to answer questions, enter into conversation. And let's turn to that part of the program now.
Good evening, Professor Lipstadt. It is an honor to share the Zoom stage with you today.
Thank you.
And I think the hardest part about where we sit tonight is that if you had told me 8 years ago, 10 years ago, that in 2020 we would be seeing the rates of anti-Semitism that we are seeing in Ohio and across the nation, I don't know that I would have believed you. But yet, here we are. It's 2020, and in the 40 plus years we at ADL have been tracking anti-Semitic incidents, we're seeing rates this year in Ohio that we've never seen before. And so I think that sets the stage of where we are as a state, as a nation, when it comes to the spread of anti-Semitism. And so, I guess my first question more broadly to you is, what are some of those root causes of the spread that we're seeing today?
Yeah, I think that there a number of things. And as I say, remember, anti-Semitism has been rightfully called the longest or the oldest hatred, for good reason. As I said, one of the sources I cited was the New Testament. It's been around for a very long time. But why now? And James, 10 years ago, if you had told me I'd be writing a book entitled Anti-Semitism Here and Now, I would say, oh my God, that's alarmist. Of course not. That's not the title I'm going to choose. I think there are a number of things. I think, first of all, we live in an age of populism. My view is right, your view is wrong. Where there's a very narrow window for conversation, a very narrow window for exchange. And we've seen it. I've mentioned it before, but in the COVID, in the anti-lockdown demonstrations in Columbus, Ohio, when the anti-lockdown demonstration, there was someone marching with I'm sure you know it. You probably could bring it up for us to see an Israeli flag, but in the center was a rat. And I think there was a dollar sign with it. Or in Illinois, where they, Hal Pritzker, Hal the governor, et cetera, et cetera. And with that populism, of course, nationalism. And I'm a loyal citizen, a patriot, et cetera. But nationalism means my country and not your country. That only me and not you, et cetera. So I think that those two things, and we have leaders in different countries, whether it's Orban in Hungary, whether it's right-wing groups in this country as well, who have engaged in that kind of thing. Whether they believe it or not, they've enabled it. And then finally, James, I think most importantly is the delivery system. Social media. And I'm not against social. If we didn't have social media, we wouldn't be all, imagine this lockdown and this pandemic, however you're observing it, however your state is observing it, without social media. We'd be in far worse mental health shape without that. When I first started to work on the topic of anti-Semitism, if you want to, I'm sorry, of Holocaust denial, if you wanted to get Holocaust denial material, you got it in a plain envelope without a return address because you didn't want the post office knowing you were mailing that kind of stuff, especially if you were sending it across borders or from a European country. Now, all you have to do is, you don't have to put in Holocaust denial into the search engine. Put in Anne Frank, and I don't know, the third, fourth reference will be something about the diary being fake. So now people have a delivery system which didn't exist before. For all that it's good, it also comes with very bad ramifications.
So, Deborah, that leads me to two questions. In that answer, you said about leaders, some leaders both here and in foreign countries that that their words mattered, their words do matter, and it's important not to enable it. And then in your talk earlier, you said you care. You don't necessarily care what somebody has in their heart, but you care about the impact of their words because their words carry the day and inspire others. And so I think that that's an important thing for us to talk about tonight is what do we expect from our world leaders, our state leaders, our local leaders when it comes to the words that they're using, and what can we do to combat it?
Well, we can hope that they would recognize the impact of their words. As I said earlier, words count. The Nazis didn't come into power, and I'm not comparing anyone today to Nazis, but I just want to use an example that we know. The Nazis didn't come into power with a plan to destroy the Jews, to kill the Jews. The Nazis came into power engaging in overtly anti Semitic words, songs, propaganda, cartoons, speeches, etc. But those words morphed into actions, morphed into, firing Jewish judges, firing Jewish teachers, firing Jewish lawyers, firing Jewish doctors, and then into physical violence, and then, of course, into genocide. So words definitely matter. And I don't want to get political. Our country has gone through political turmoil. But I think it's important that if you're asked about QAnon, or if you're asked about white supremacy, you don't say sure, you give an unequivocal condemnation. If someone is asked about anti-Semitism, I don't want them to say, oh, sure, I'm against it, and then move on and say, but I like this group or that group. No group, I don't care what your views are. If I'm a politician, if you are an anti-Semite, if you are a racist on the right or on the left, and they're in both places, I don't want your support. And it has to be unequivocal, and it has to be there, and it has to be upfront. And especially if it's coming from someone you support or someone with whom you identify, then call them out, because you have much more what my students might call street cred, street credibility, than someone on the other side of the political spectrum. Hold your leaders up to high standards, and that includes be willing to criticize them.
Um, Deborah, you also spoke about the spread of hate on social media, the spread of hate online. And I think one thing that many of us have noticed, myself included, is kind of that steady drip of anti-Semitism and hate that is on your Facebook feed, that is in your Twitter feed, and you see it now on a daily basis. What could we as a society do when it comes to the spread of anti-Semitism online? Because it's everywhere, and it's pervasive, and it's very hard to control.
It's exactly, that's what makes it so that it's everywhere, it's pervasive, and it's hard to control. I wish I could pick up the phone to Zuckerberg and tell him, listen, get it off that site. Holocaust denial is not a point of view. Holocaust denial is anti-Semitism. As I say in Hebrew, sof pasuk, the end of the conversation. That's what it is. It's not a mistaken view of history or something. I think we have to call on the social media platforms. I'm not sure legislation is right. I'm not sure legislation will work, but the expectation that this is just not right. People say, well, what about freedom of speech? Freedom of speech or freedom of the press, or, the social media being the equivalent of today's press or something. Just because there's freedom of the press doesn't mean I can go to a newspaper and demand that my op-ed be published. They'd laugh me off they'd laugh me out of the room. Um, these platforms can control what they put up and what they don't put up, and it's so important for them to recognize the impact of what they do, and I think to call them to that standard. Now that's a very big thing, and most of you are listening, myself included. I'm who's saying it. No, yeah, right. Zuckerberg's going to worry about what I say, or whatever the name of the guy is, Dorsey, whatever his name is, who runs Twitter. But Twitter's even has been better than Facebook on this. But we can start on a micro level. And when our kids say something, or our grandkids say something, or our students say something, we can tell, stop. We don't talk that way. We don't think that way. That's unacceptable. It starts at home. Does that mean that every kid who ends up on the far left or far right engaging in prejudicial views didn't hear it, didn't get told that at home? No, of course not. But I can assure you that those who weren't told it at home there's a better chance that they're going to be engaging in it. It's not fail safe, but without it, it's going to be a failure. It's much more likely that the person will engage in it.
I always say, Deborah, no one is born with hate. Hate is learned. And so it starts at home and then in the classroom, right? And that's why we in our office concentrate heavily on education in our elementary schools and in our middle schools, because while hate is learned, hate could also be unlearned.
Yeah, what is it? What's South Pacific? You've got to be taught to hate.
Yep.
Maybe
Yeah.
you're a little young. It may be before your time, but go listen to South Pacific. I'm pretty sure that's where it's from. And if not, there'll be 27 people in the Q&A or chat who will tell you exactly where it's
from. Well, speaking about the Q&A and chat, there are some questions coming in from audience members. So let's ask a couple of those questions. There's an audience member, and I think this harkens back to the very beginning of your presentation on the different forms of anti-Semitism, or the four things, stereotypes. The question is, why does George Soros always come up in conversation?
George Soros. I'm glad that was mentioned. George Soros has become, in the words of a British sociologist, David Hirsch, who studies this, he put it so well. George Soros is the Rothschild of the 21st century. He's everywhere. He's ubiquitous. Now, look, George Soros, you can disagree with George Soros's financial policies. You can disagree with his politics. But the way he has been used to become the bugaboo, the puppeteer, it's George Soros who is forcing the groups from the south up the border. It's George Soros who's engineering the influx into Europe of Black people, of brown people, of Muslims, etc. When you hear the name George Soros mentioned, know that the person who's saying it, what he's failing to add, or what she's failing to add, is George Soros, the Jew. George Soros is a Hungarian Jew. I have even heard Jews, traditional Jews, it doesn't matter whether they're traditional or not, but you would think someone who's knowledgeable. A psychologist once said this to me, oh, George Soros was a Nazi. So it took me all my, restraint to keep from slugging him. I said, wait a minute. When the Nazis came into Germany, George Soros was 13, 14 years old. His father hid him with his father was very resourceful and had made plans. His father was a lawyer and made plans to hide members of his family with different Hungarians. And George was hidden with a local official who one day was ordered to go and inventory the property of a Jewish family that had been deported. And George was taken along by the man. The man said, you'll come with me today. And Soros talks about the fact that he was afraid to pee that entire day, because if he had and someone had seen, they would have recognized he was circumcised, and only Jews were circumcised in Hungary at that But to talk about him as a Nazi is to say, even Jews can be anti-Semitic. Jews have incorporated, have absorbed the anti-Semitic um, stereotypes about Soros. So Soros is a very useful figure, financier, powerful, on the left, etc. And as I say, you can totally disagree. I disagree with his views on Israel. I disagree, and some in the financial world disagree with his views on and his actions in financially, etc. But when he's used like that, it's just like they used to talk about the House of Rothschild. It's the exact same
You know, Deborah, there's another question coming in from the audience. It's actually one that I get quite often, and I'm sure you do as well, which is the increasing rates of anti-Semitism that we're seeing across the country. Is it worse because there are more anti-Semites, or is it worse because today's environment is making it more acceptable for people to express those views out?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Both. Both.
yeah.
Both. It's not either or. It's more acceptable to say those things today. And that's why I say we have to, even if we're talking amongst people, good, like-minded people, words count. Words count. Um, I've had students come to me, I've been teaching for a long time, and they'll sometimes come to me and they'll say, I'm in a suite with a bunch of other girls, very lovely, etc. But one of them made a crack about, oh, it's break. You're probably going skiing with your family. She says, I'm here on scholarship, but she assumes that I'm going to go skiing with my family because I'm Jewish. And she said, I didn't want to call her. I'm the only Jew in the suite, etc. She said, I didn't want to call her out because I don't want to lose her friendship or whatever. And what I say to them as kindly as possible is this the kind of person you want to be friends with? Or a guy will come and say, well, I'm joining a fraternity and there are not many Jews in the fraternity. And some of the guys were making cracks about my being Jewish, but I don't want to say anything because I want to get into the fraternity. And what I'll say, if I think the student is willing to hear it, is this the kind of fraternity you want to be part of? So I think we have to make it unacceptable today, whether it's regarding Jews, whether it's regarding people of color. There's a feeling that I can say things, I can do things, I can make accusations that once were unacceptable. And I don't know how to stop the people who are doing that, but I know, what was it, Edmund Burke? All that it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I'm butchering that quote, but you get the gist. Um, and so we have to speak up. Whether it's like a finger in the dike, I don't know, but at least we have to try.
What this will probably be one of my last questions, Deborah. But when we talk about we need to speak up, one of the refrains that I hear sometimes in response is, we make up 2% of the American population. So it's quite clear that we can't stop anti-Semitism by ourselves. So, and that it must also come from coalition partners and other people in the community. And what suggestions do you have about how to form those partnerships, how to form those bonds, so that we can more adequately tackle the problem?
I think, first of all, you can't be against one ism and not be against all isms. You can't say, I hate racism, but anti Semitism, homophobia is okay. Or I hate anti Semitism, but racism, homophobia, hatred of all Muslims is okay. You can't do that for two reasons. First of all, you're a hypocrite. If hatred is wrong, hatred is wrong, and you've got to fight it. Now, are you going to fight it more strongly when it's your own ox that is gored, to use a Talmudic reference? When it's your own, of course you're going to fight it. Of course you're going to take a stronger stance when it's your family or your group that's under threat. But you can't turn a blind eye. You can't do that morally. It's just wrong. The Torah teaches justice, justice shall you pursue, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. And it doesn't say only for your own group. you pursue justice for everyone, because you can't just be selective in that kind of thing. But also, when you talked about coalition building, I don't want to say fight hatred and fight prejudice only for utilitarian purposes. But if you want other people to be by your side, you have to be by their side. And so many of us were touched from afar, and people we know in Pittsburgh up close, after the tragedy at the synagogue, and of the congregations at the synagogue, how many different groups of immigrants, groups of minorities came forward and said to the Jews, "You were there for us. We want you to know we're there for you." Um, it's that way of fighting it. I think that is so important. But I think the final thing, and this, if you'll allow me to sort of bring it together with this, is that of course we fight anti-Semitism, to use the term I used a moment ago, because it's our own ox that is gored. It's our people who in the lifetime of people still in our community, maybe someone this call, we lost one out of every 3 Jews on the face of the earth during the Shoah, and we've never replaced them. Of course we're going to care, but the reason to be concerned about anti-Semitism is not just, it's a big reason, because our people are in danger. But anti-Semitism is a threat to democracy. I can say as a historian that I know of no democracy that harbored within it anti-Semitism that was a healthy democracy. If a democracy harbors within it anti-Semitism, and eventually racism and other isms as well, but certainly anti-Semitism, it is rotting from within. It starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. And we have to be frightened by that, fight other isms, because it is morally right, and because of coalition building. And finally, to maybe end on a take off my professorial hat and put on my proverbial kippah, if you will, or whatever my Jewish hat would be. But at the same time that we're fighting it, never to say we are Jews because of anti-Semitism, or to say I feel stronger as a Jew because of anti-Semitism. If you do that, you're giving the power to the anti-Semite to control the strength of your identity. The thing we should be saying is, I'm proud as a Jew, despite anti-Semitism. I revel in my Jewish identity despite how much of the world, the energies of the world, have been spent hurting us, harming us, hating us. We are bearers of a very proud tradition. National Council exemplifies many of those things. ADL, so many of our organizations do, but certainly National Council is built exactly on that idea, so that even as we fight it, we revel in who we are.
Thank you, Deborah. And when we talk about leaving tonight's audience with a call to action, when you said anti-Semitism is a threat to our democracy, or to any democracy, and then I go back to your point earlier in your speech where you said we need to all speak out when we see it, when we hear it. We need to be willing to say something, even when saying something is incredibly uncomfortable.
Exactly. No, James, you hit it just on the point. I know that I was supposed to shut up now, but I'm reminded of the sign in front of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. If you see something, say something.
Well, Deborah, I think we're going to leave it there, and we will kick it back over to Leslie to wrap things up. Thank you so much for sharing the stage with me tonight.
Deborah and James, we cannot thank you enough for sharing your expertise on anti-Semitism, its many faces, and how it is evolving in this technological age and this world of divisiveness. I'm sure I speak for our entire audience in telling you that we've learned a great deal tonight. How we respond to the growing threat of this issue is something that plagues us. In addition to your strong ideas, we would leave our attendees with these thoughts. Number one, Follow the activity of the Ohio legislature as it moves, although very slowly, toward legislation, we hope, to mandate Holocaust education in the schools. We'll keep you informed of the progress so that you may contact your legislators by phone, urging them to move forward. Number 2, continue to seek education on expressions of anti-Semitism from both the left and the right, and how to respond when you hear it, see it, or read it. And number 3, follow the Anti-Defamation League's excellent social media accounts and watch webinars on the subject from all credible sources. We thank you very much for attending this Lois Zaas annual memorial lecture. If you are not already an NCJW member, we urge you to join so that we can continue, even during the pandemic, to improve the lives of women, children, and families through community service, social advocacy, and a wide range of virtual programming. Good night and stay safe.